Good evening. I am super happy to have so many of you come out because it's a beautiful day. It's a good day to barbecue. It's a good day just to leave work and go home and enjoy the weather. And certainly the topic that I'm going to talk about is difficult on a lot of different levels. And the information that I provide you, know this. I have said frequently in my job, I do not lie, and I am transparent. And while there are many people who would rather I not do either, this is the kind of issue that if we're not upfront about it, it'll sneak up on you and devastate an entire community. And I've certainly seen it. I've seen it in southeastern Ohio. I've seen it in northwestern Ohio. So I'm going to give you some information, and we'll probably ask some questions at the end, okay? I am high maintenance. I can't believe y'all have mic'd me with 2 mics because I am super loud. But I'm going to try and bring it down a notch just for your benefit. When I say innovative strategies, it's because this is not new. And what I mean by this is not new is, and this is the goal. I'm going to give you some specialized knowledge, some special information that honestly, most people go to school for 3-4 years to find out this information, or unfortunately, many become experts because it's happening in their families and in their lives. So I'm going to share some special information with you. When I talk about this, I want you to do me a favor. Everybody's got a piece of paper in front of them, right? I know you want them to use it for the survey, but I'm not on that. Here's why. I want you to turn over a piece of paper, and I see you all have pens, so there's no excuses. I want you to take 2 minutes, that's all, 2 minutes. How many of you are familiar with this Ancestry, 23andMe, give us your blood and we'll tell you who you are? Family trees are amazing, right? Mine has been phenomenal to look at. But there's another type of family tree that we call a genogram. So what I want you to do is a family tree, a genogram, whereby you're looking at your family through a different lens. Not the date that they were born, not when they died, and not where they were born. I want you to look at these issues and say, did anyone in your family, mother, father, grandparents, have any of these issues? And then, if you have enough time, go to your own children. Okay? Put your name at the top. It's just yours. It's not mine. Put your name at the top. This is for you. Keep this in mind. So, here's an example, and I love that we have young people here because I'm telling you now, the prevention and the young people, you know a community is doing right when you have a lot of young people present. So, first thing, if your family, anybody in your family, mom, dad, siblings have or had the disease of addiction, alcohol, drugs, cigarettes. For some, they would say gambling. The other is, was there any abuse in the home? Or were they abused physically, emotionally, sexually? Lack of employment. Now, when I do this in southeastern Ohio, down around the river, I am overwhelmed. I was in Ironton just within the last month, and a few things struck me. One was a physician got up and said, you guys always put this stuff on computers, and you want people to tap into computers. Guess what? Over half our people don't have broadband. So you want us to get on a computer and read a document that we don't have access to. And then the other was the rate of unemployment, which is intergenerational. So if somebody was unemployed, chronic illnesses are things like Huntington's disease or, as my grandmother used to say, the gout or the sugar. It always had that preposition, the, right? If they were illiterate, if they couldn't read. I've been in many communities where a third of the population, older, could not read. These are all things that you're writing your family history, so go ahead. And sometimes even the high school dropout is due to had to get employment, had to work, and where they worked. My grandfather worked in the steel mills. I'm going to give you 1 more minute on that, and then we're going to keep on flowing. Probably should have asked how much time I have. I could go on for hours, but I won't. How much time do I have, Amy? Stop that. Really, we'll camp out in here. I'm just joking. Okay, so I want you to take that, and again, your stuff is on it, turn it over. Don't look at it throughout this presentation. Some people like to edit as they go, and I don't want you to do that. So when I talk about my job, my primary job is to decrease the number of people who are dying in the state of Ohio due to opioids. And that is right now 14 people a day. When I started this job, it was 4 people a day. So when I look at data, and people will often say, I just got a call from Belmont County today, and she said, local law enforcement won't give us the data on how much they're dispensing. And I said, well, let them know this. I can't continue to fund them if I don't have data, because data is like making an investment. If you don't tell me there's a problem, then how do I know there's a problem? This told us that in 2000, Ohio was ranked 26 in unintentional overdoses. As of 2017, we are first in crude death rate. And I think it's hard for people to understand, but we're not the largest in landmass. We're not the largest in population, but we are number 1 in unintentional overdose deaths. When I got into the position, one of the things that struck me was everybody has this need to always say who the enemy is, because then you feel like, well, if I just go after the enemy, then it'll be easier. And so we absolutely will demonize an entire population if possible. That's just our culture, right? When I tell you I'm honest, I'm just being honest. And so one of the first things we did is we said it's the cartels. It's the cartels. When I looked at that data, okay, maybe a third of them you can say are drug dealers. I can't even assume that it's all cartel. But 2/3 of those deaths are from doctors, not a cartel. And until recently, we didn't have drug dealers making caps. Know the language of the population you're surrounded by and the issue you're dealing with. My daughters can be talking about something in front of me and I have no idea what they're talking about because there's code words for everything. So caps are fake capsules that are made with fentanyl or heroin. So it looks like you're taking a pill versus trying to get high, right? But in 2012, and I'll be honest with you, up until 2016, those were pills. And as you see it progress, that's the very definition of the disease of addiction. Chronic progressive disease that can ultimately lead to death, right? So now I'm going to give you another one. Cancer is a chronic progressive disease that can ultimately lead to death. High blood pressure. They all had that same definition of chronic and progressive. And what I saw here was the progression of the disease. And so it used to be you could go into an emergency room and say, man, I am in pain, right? I fell down, I twisted my ankle, and I could go into the doctor, and this is a true story because it happened, and I told you I walk a lot, and I'm sorry. But this truly happened. I like to go fishing. You will like to know that my tackle box is in my car because somebody said I could go up to a river here and do really good fishing, but I didn't get here in time. And so I had my fishing pole with me downtown in Columbus. And I was walking from my car to my office in the state office tower, but I had on heels because I had a meeting that day. And so I'm walking with my fishing pole, brand new Shimano reel, is gorgeous. Walking with my pole and I have my bag. And as I was walking, my heel got caught in this little tiny piece of sidewalk that was missing in front of the PNC Bank. And when I went, and look at me, I'm a big girl. When I went to fall, all I thought was not on my pole. And so I turned this way, and when I fell, I hit the inside of my knee. And it was like instant, like a cartoon where you get hit in the head and it swells instantly. But instead of dealing with the pain, what I noticed were there were 2 people who had followed me across the parking garage who did like this. They had those roller carts, and they walked around me and kept going. Now I'm angry. Now I'm filth, and more filth, and how do you walk by me and you don't even take it? You did that, right? I'm angry. So what happens when you're angry is you get endorphins that go to that immediate place of pain, right? And now I don't even feel the pain. I go in and I write a very harsh letter to PNC about the liability of me falling. And then I decide, answer some emails. I go to stand up 2 hours later, and my slacks were kind of stuck to my knee, which means I knew I had blood, but the swelling was huge. In 2015, had I gone to the emergency room with that, you know what they would have given me? 30 perk. 30 pills of Percocet 30 milligrams each. Street value of that is anywhere from $900 to $1,200. It's usually $1 per milligram. Know that. So do you understand the currency value of unused pills? It is a currency in a community that does not have employment. And so now what we did through the Governor's Cabinet Opiate Action Team to address the overprescribing was to say no more 30 days. If it's that kind of injury, you get 3 days of medication, twisted ankle, even if you hurt your shoulder. Unless they send you into immediate surgery, you're going to get 3 days, 4 days if it's a holiday weekend. We thought we did well. In Ohio, we had 65.5 opioid pills for every man, woman, and child. 65.5 for everyone in this room. And I know as a clinician, if you take that medication for more than 13 days, the likelihood of you becoming addicted increases exponentially. And so imagine we have 65 for every man, woman, and child. Do you know how many they had in all of Europe? All of Europe, which is, France, Belgium, Spain, Germany, right? Two for every man, woman, and child. So that means that we need to look at ourselves and look at our culture. And what our culture tells us is, I'm not going to feel pain, and I'm going to get my needs met immediately. And if you tell me that I have to wait, I'm going to find a way to get my needs met, even if that means going to my aunt's house, going into her bathroom, opening up her pills, and taking 2 pills. Now, the officer will know this is usually called pinching the bottle. Because if you have pills, I'm going to take 2 pills from you, 2 from you, 2 from you. You're never going to know because there's an excess of prescribing. And you're never going to sit there and count through all your pills, right? But 1 pill can actually kill. And it has happened in the state. We've had children who have overdosed from what are called Skittles parties. Do you know about that? It's where they get all the pills together and they put it in a bowl and all the pills look like a different color, Skittle. And so in Clark County, there was a kid who was a state championship wrestler. His dad was a colonel in the Air Force, retired down at Wright Pat. Cole, his name was Cole. His mother was a school teacher, and he had never used. And when they did this pill party, here's how it went. The teacher said, be good tomorrow because we're going to have a substitute. My teachers never told me there was going to be a substitute because that was just going to be a heyday for me. Really, it just meant I was going to take a vacation day. But be good, right? So one of the kids brings in all of his grandmother's pills, his grandmother who passed away, right? Happy to say that can no longer happen because now if hospice is in the home, it's a law that all the pills will be removed by law enforcement. Not by the nurse or by the doctor. It has to be removed by law enforcement. Cole took 1 pill. It turned out that the pill was morphine. He had no body fat, had never used before. That's considered somebody who is opiate naive. And he overdosed and died. You can't imagine the loss of Danielle, his mother. You can't imagine. Or the best friend who bought the pills in. When I talk to you about the decrease in pills, it's for that reason. Get rid of them. Get rid of them properly. I know you have a drop box here in the town. That's where they're to go. Don't pour them down. I told my mother had cancer on her spine and skull. And she said, well, the thing is, I don't want to take them because my mother's generation actually knows not to take these pills. Because my mother would say to you, well, I think that fat meat is greasy, which means pain hurts. And I have cancer, so it should hurt, right? So she wouldn't take it. And I said, but Ma, here's the thing, it's really bad stuff. Let me show you what it is, and I'll show you a graphic in a bit. No, I'll show you because it's better when you see it. When I told her how bad it was, you know what she said? Well, I can't get rid of it because your aunt has that thing with her spine, with her disc. And when I said, Ma, that's a felony 5, possibly a felony 4 because you're transferring a scheduled narcotic that is yours. Oh, they wouldn't arrest me. I started the drug courts in Franklin County. We absolutely would arrest you if you did not have a script because it's gotten to that point. We now have a rule We are down to 57 pills for every man, woman, and child. That obviously isn't enough. So what the governor did, what he tried to avoid, was to go to rule, which means now if you have an acute surgery or injury, the most you're going to get is 7 days of medication. You need to go back to your doctor and the doctor can re-prescribe, but they need to be evaluating your progress for whatever that issue is. If it is a chronic condition, and a lot of doctors will hide behind this and say, well, the governor said that I can't give you pills. Come on. If we're talking about somebody who's 64, 65 years old, has been taking their medication, maintained their house, hasn't been robbing people and paying their bills on time, you have to put the picture together. We're talking about those who are chronic abusers and pill seekers, which, by the way, we are down 87% on pill seekers. So we know that our rules are working. But what happened was they went from the pill to heroin. And how did that happen? Business. We always treat this like it's just a criminal issue, which it clearly is criminal in terms of the trafficking, but it's also financial and it's money. And when people say they don't understand it, they say, but they give out the drugs for free. I say, okay, hey, did you just eat for free?
I did.
Why?
Because it was available.
Because it was available. Right? You go through Starbucks, if Starbucks says, I'm going to give you free mochas for the next week, how many of you turn it down? And then we think, well, what about the choice aspect? Well, I prefer Pepsi. I do not like Coke. And yet, when Diet Pepsi came out, I loved it even more. Do you know what Pepsi was doing? Expanding their market and their customer base. This is business. So what does the drug dealer do? They're not pressuring you. When the mafia was running the heroin connection for the French Connection, you would hear about it, right? You would hear about awful things happening on the turnpike. Or you'd hear about major families who were arrested in Jersey. Have you heard about that? No. Because the business model that the mafia and the cartel are using now, and by the way, yes, both of them, is the customer is always right. So I'll deliver it to you. And if you tell me at some point you don't want it, I'll say, okay, give me that burner cell phone back, and then I leave you 2 balloons and say, I'm not going to pressure you, but I also don't want you to get sick. So here you go. Now what's the likelihood of her not calling me back? Right? So this is customer service, and it's expanding a market. In Toledo, they have drug dealers who are doing twist ties with phone numbers on it, and if you pull up in the gas station, they throw it on your seat. Customer service, right in your face, and it was available, right? So how do you combat that? Well, you start telling the truth about the problem. That's how you get to end the demand. So here's one of the truths I know. When we looked at treatment admissions, the reality was it was only the red counties that you see here that were really bad. Right? And then it's gray, but the blue was like, really, we're not seeing that much. So the majority of the state in 2001, we weren't seeing it. And we thought, well, we can deal with this. We can go ahead and put our resources down here. So you're dealing with Dayton, Columbus, right? You got universities, doctors, we can deal with this. Even Scioto, because they can go over into Ashland, Kentucky. We can deal with this. So this was 2001. This was 2014. There was no way to stay in front of a moving target. And every time we thought we could deal with it, another issue came about. We can deal with the pills, we'll get the prescribing down. Oh, wait a minute, there's heroin. Oh, well, we can deal with the heroin. We'll start talking about MAT and get people in oh, wait, now it's fentanyl. And what I mean by fentanyl is when I look at crude death rates now, we had to change the color so we could show some variance across the state. What you see here is there's no county that's not hit. The red areas are those that are worse in terms of crude death rate per capita, but here's where the fentanyl deaths come in. So when I look at this, when I say the yellow is anywhere from 0 to 15% of the deaths that are occurring, crude death rate. Those are having heroin or opiates within the system. The orange, I think it's 15 to 30%, and the red is 30, well, the highest is up here at Summit County, which I think is 64%. You can't stay in front of this. So what we can do is try to inoculate and tell families, let me tell you why this is happening. And here's the why. So we start seeing the data, and we're like, okay, this is where it's happening, this is who it's happening to. We're asking the police, what are the zip codes you're hitting up the most? What are the gangs you're dealing, all of that. That's great, but why? So the why is this. In 1961, the primary reason that people went to this, let's think about it, Ward Cleaver. You remember the beaver? The beeve? His dad went to work, and it was very much that kind of advertising agency. You come home, June has a martini, Beeve wants to do something, and Lumpy's got his friend over, Eddie Haskell, who is AKA a sociopath, right? So that's stress. And so he would go to the doctor for heart disease, stroke, any kind of neurological disorders. That was common. Down at the bottom, you see, only about 3% were going for back pain or muscle issues, muscular. But by 2011, and ever since, over 35% of patients are going to the doctor because they're in pain. And what is pain? So when I go through pain, and I told you I was going to show you this cool graphic, it's because I'm not a scientist, which is why I went into social work. So I'm visual. This is the molecular structure of heroin. If you look at it, you see these four little, right? You see it? That's heroin. This is hydrocodone. If you have a bad cough, upper respiratory, they'll give you hydrocodone. Do you notice something? It's got those same four. You see that? The cells? Well, and here's buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is Subutex or Suboxone. Do you see what it's made up of? How many of you have had a real surgery that you're willing to share? Sir, are you willing to share your surgery?
You can have it if you want it.
Tell me.
Kidney cancer.
Ooh wee. So you've got the big incision.
No, 3 little ones. Robotic.
Boy, science is amazing, isn't it?
Went home the next day, yeah.
And what did they prescribe you?
Hydrocodone.
How much?
30.
Did you take them all?
Kidney, well, no, I didn't take very many. I already had 60 from my kidney stones.
So you had 60, they gave you more. But why weren't you taking them?
I didn't like them. I didn't need them.
Right. Can you go with me the next time I present? Because you're the best example.
Depends on the food you buy.
Got you. So what I'm trying to say is, if that doctor had said to you, listen, I'm not going to give you any more of the oxycodone. I do have some heroin. What would you have said?
No.
But a doctor's in a white coat, and a doctor's saying, this medication is going to help you with your pain. Would you? Yeah. No? Okay, so this is what I mean by thinking critically and telling people the truth. It's pharmaceutical heroin. And its intention is to kill pain. That's its purpose, kill pain. But then they did this study, this Cochrane study. And you know what they found out? Anybody in here in the medical field? Oh, man. Do you know that they being nurses, are the best scientists ever? And you know, well, no, only second to kids, because kids are great scientists. They found out that alternating ibuprofen and acetaminophen is more beneficial than a painkiller because it actually takes down the swelling and increases the blood flow to whatever the injury is. But do you see that advertised? Right, because the FDA has made it so that anybody can produce ibuprofen, right? When I told you of the perfect storm, one of the perfect storms was this. In 2001, you weren't allowed to advertise medication on television. The lobbyists did their job, and then they were allowed to advertise. Given, they would give all the side effects. And you would see comedians tell jokes about like, oh my God, if I take Lexapro, all it says is I might have diarrhea, vomiting, lose my left leg and my eyesight, but other than that, it's pretty good, right? Well, that was a lobbying move. And so as a result of that, now you have advertising that's happening on television, so I can self-diagnose, and then I'm constantly being told that doctors don't have time. Doctor doesn't have time to see, you gotta hurry up, he's 15 minutes behind. So if I go into the doctor and I say, listen, I have a sharp pain that's happening here, I think it's my sciatic nerve, probably from pregnancy, and I had an injury with my knee. Right? That's the perfect storm. And so when we come out of that storm, now we have to tell some truths about how we got there and prevent it from ever happening. This is pharmaceutical heroin. This is the result of heroin on the brain and opioids on the brain. Do you notice something? Sleepiness. Oh, let's just go back and forth. Sleepiness. Yep, sleepiness. Coma. Confusion. Nausea, severe itching. There's a reason for that. When it starts to leave the body, there's going to be this feeling of spiders. And there's been a lot of digging. I'll show you a few graphics that I think help. Pain relief, euphoria. This is the same thing. And yet, how many doctors say, listen, I need to tell you something. We need to look at your family history and your history of medication use and your history of drug use, not because I'm judging you, but because I don't want to get you turned out. That conversation is not happening. Well, it wasn't happening. Now it is. So now the brain is what's important. Okay, so I'm giving you this. This is why you have young people and families, generation after generation, who are coming to the table saying, guess what? And most people will say it's genetic. It ain't that easy. What about the person who was adopted, who never became addicted, but the parent was? So it's not just one thing. And again, that's our culture. We want to just look at one thing. It's not that easy. So here's what you should know. This part of your brain, which I grab often, because it actually is known to calm you down when you're stressed if you just hold your head. It's grounding you, right? This part of your brain only exists for 3 reasons, and it goes back to caveman days. The first, fight or flight survival. Here comes a dinosaur, I'm scared, fight or flight survival, I'm gonna hide. Second part, logical thinking. Clearly, I can't hide behind this because it can still see me. So now I have to go into a cave where there's a rock that puts a barrier. Survival, logical thinking. And then the third, there's kids, but it involves procreation. Babies, and how you get them. That's pleasure seeking. But if you think about it, just shout out for me a couple of things that give you pleasure today. What makes you happy today?
The sunshine.
What'd you say?
The sunshine.
Sunshine? That's what's up. What else? What else gives you pleasure? What?
She said finally, sunshine.
Finally. Come on. Puppies. Anybody else? What gives you pleasure? Coffee. We're going to talk about that later. Okay. I'm going to show you the receptor on that one. What gives you pleasure?
Spending time outside in the sunshine.
Okay. Who likes chocolate?
Oh, yeah.
Who likes eating? Gives me much beer, wine. See, as we've evolved, what gives us pleasure has evolved. And so we're no longer about just procreation, just having pleasure. But most of that still stays the same. And now for parents and grandparents, I'm going to tell you something, it's like the best secret ever. The logical part of the brain doesn't actually fully develop until between 18 and 21, mom. Which means when you're asking him or her, have you lost your mind? Honestly, they don't know, because you're asking them to process in real time with all the faculties that you have. They don't have it. Now, it's not an excuse. It's saying, you know what, I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about it, and then I'm going to come back and ask you. Like my daughter this morning when I went, explain to me how you forget your books when the only purpose you have in the morning is going to school. And she genuinely looked at me and she was like, I don't know. And I was like, that's a decent answer. Don't let it happen again. Anyway, that's the frontal lobe. Now, why is that important? Because this part of the brain is tremendously affected by the disease of addiction. And when you go to, I'm going to see if this works. It doesn't, but it would have been cool. When you go back here near the cerebellum, right, there's a spot in the brain called the amygdala. That holds memory. So take another minute, just take a minute. Take a deep breath, and I'm going to ask you to do this, and please trust, no one's going to come towards you or anything, because I believe in trauma-informed care. I want you just to take a moment, close your eyes. Think of your fondest, best childhood memory. Okay? Now, think of your worst childhood memory. Okay. How is it, all these years later, you can recall it? Because it had such an impact on your life that your brain, your amygdala said, store it. And it didn't just say store only the good, but you better store the bad so you never let it happen again, right? So this is where the two issues come together. If I do like this, so you remember laughing with Lily Tomlin and she would listen in on the calls? This right here, moment is history. This is how we used to talk to each other on the phone. And you had to plug a cord in and she would then take the cord and make a connection so we could talk to each other, right? That was before all the fiber optics. So what happens when you send messages in the brain? It's simple things like wake up, use the bathroom, eat, drink, right? And so we all have these receptors in our brains that send messages. But here's what happens. That receptor, once you start taking a substance, starts filling up. Some substances don't affect the same way. Alcohol, it'll take a long time, but eventually, can I ask you, sir? You remember Andy Griffith with Otis? Do you have an Otis? Kind of like the town drinker that you put, yeah, don't say his name, her name, don't say it. But Otis, it took Otis years to get to that point. And have you seen a 20-something-year-old who's been using dope for less than 2 years who looks like Otis? It's because each drug affects it differently, but the end result is the same, which is messages are not going to go through. It's going to block up that receptor. So then what you have when that receptor is blocked, I love this graphic. Kids, you're going to love it because it's funny. They don't sleep, they don't want to eat, and they can't poo. And here's why. The receptor has become clogged, and so the message isn't going through that they're hungry. So when they go to his house, they slam on bologna and cheese. They sleep beyond belief. But before they get to that point, somebody's defecated all over. Someone has vomited all over. It is leaving their body. If you think about the boardwalk with saltwater taffy, that's what it feels like being pulled out. And so what people say to me is, wait a minute, if they go through all that and 3 days later it starts to empty, why would they do it again? Oh, remember what I said about the brain? Because the drug itself does not distinguish which pain it's addressing. It isn't going, okay, you hurt your shoulder, right? But that childhood bad memory, it's not distinguishing. All it knows is I'm killing pain. That's what I'm supposed to do. And so it gets caught up into this vicious cycle of, but you don't want to go through the withdrawal again. Yeah, but you aren't dealing with the demons that I have in here. That Pandora's box was opened up because I had a legitimate injury. But the box was open because no one wanted to tell me the truth. That pain hurts, that you can heal, and that not everything that happens in the world is good and easy. Nor does it happen in real time like your phone lets you think. It is a process that you have to go through, right? So when I deal with this, I deal with the parents. Do you know what this parent looks like? Think of it from this perspective. Chaos. There is no emotion that is regulated. So you can't say they're always happy, they're always sad, they're always energetic, there's no always to anything. Because you don't know what's triggering them at any given time. The delirium, the impaired thing, the lying is classic. I have heard some doozies. And I'll tell you this, even though sometimes I joke, here's why. Because there's such a thing as secondary trauma. And if I don't cope with this pain, it's going to eat away at me. So I have to cope the best way I can, which also includes therapy. And it also includes talking to other professionals so we can process together. What does the home of this parent look like? A lot of times teachers or caseworkers or team members, community support folk will say, yeah, we had to go into the home and it was hard. It was hard because here are some of the signs that we're seeing. Sometimes, and that blood splatter is a little bit deceiving. Think about it when you're at the nurse or doctor and they take your blood, that's the size of the splatter. It's not this huge. You might see those around. You might see little burns on the carpet, and that includes their car. Because typically when you score, you're going to use within about 3 minutes of scoring. And that doesn't mean you're going to wait, go home, you're going to use immediately. The other is smudge marks on the light switches, and this is something I tell people to always check for, as well as vents. If you have a vent and screws are missing, usually something's being hidden. Now, I want to tell you this. For anyone who is in recovery, I'm not trying to trigger. What I'm trying to do is to give realistic images so that, again, we talk about it and we don't sit in shame of what it is. So what does the child of this parent look like? How many of you work in the school? Wow, this is awesome. So dealing with the child who can't regulate their emotions. Why? Because the same person who teaches you to walk, talk, and eat teaches you how to regulate your emotions. And if mom and dad are using and they're constantly moving, the child hasn't learned how. And so what seems to be very simple, the child gets overwhelmed at. But that's because no one's modeled how to be calm. The school has become the safe haven for many of these kids. And I say to the schools, thank you, and get yourself a safety room and a private room, and get a weighted vest, because it helps them in terms of how they cope. The other is, they're very sensitive, but again, that has to do with how you regulate. I remember when I was teaching, I would say something like, so-and-so, could you please sit down? And then another kid on the opposite side of the class would be like, why are you always getting on me? And I was talking to him. But remember, kids are also self-centered, right? And omnipotent, and the focus is here. So what I had to do always was we. I was very conscious of my language. The other is the inability to control behavior and low self-esteem. And my mother and aunt used to tell me about this all the time. The kid who picks on you typically is the one who has the lowest self-esteem, who has the greatest need to be accepted. So when you think about your childhood, do you know one of these kids? And if you think a little further, did their family have some issues? So, here's what we know about kids who grow up in these homes, okay? And it's like when you do the Beatitudes of Matthew, right? Thou shalt not. Well, this is 1 in 5. 1 in 5 American children live in homes where a parent is abusing substances. It's not always heroin, okay? The other is children who grow up in these homes where parents or caregivers, because some of them are growing up with grandparents or aunts and uncles, they are 3 times more likely to be physically, sexually, or emotionally abused, and they're 4 times more likely to be neglected by peers, because peers can be mean. I went to speak at a high school today, and I was just taken back to the most traumatic period of my life. Because they were super mean. And I'm going to give you another example of what that means. These are the Beatitudes of. They're more likely than other children to enter into foster care. They're more likely to have poor performance, more likely to have encounters with the law, even while in school. We have teachers who will call the police on a child who is only exhibiting what's happening in the home. That's why I say that safety room is amazing. They're more likely to have depression, conduct disorders, or anxiety, which, when I look at this is the amazing thing, I know what this leads to. So, you ready for the next part? The genograms that you wrote, look at them knowing what you know now. Look at your genogram that you did. Look at it a little critically. Now I'm going to let you fly away. Put it in the air, let it fly. Put it up, put it up. Now I'm going to come and collect it. Put them down. I saw something. I saw some people who immediately when I said I'm going to collect it, put it down. Huh?
You said you weren't going to collect them in the beginning.
But why would it have mattered?
Because you told us you weren't going to.
But yet, when people come into school and come into counseling situations or even go into situations at the jail, the first thing we do is say, tell us everything. Tell us everything. You have no rapport. That kid doesn't trust you. You got to trust me because I'm the teacher. No, actually, my experience with teachers is, just like when I said, who's Otis in the town? Teachers will communicate the families they do and don't like working with, and kids hear it. They're very perceptive. Counseling, the same thing. You want me to give of myself, but you're not willing to give. So here's what I'm going to give to you. The first time I smoked marijuana, I was 14 years old, right? And my brother was 16. Now, I'm telling you this for science purposes. He was 16, I was 14. The person who wanted us to smoke it was my cousin, who was an independent pharmaceutical sales representative. You know what that means? And all he was looking to do was expand his customer base. And if I can get to a high school student, I know I can get to an entire high school. And I'm going to tell you that I'm going to break you off for free. You're never going to have never ask me for any, right? So my brother goes to smoke it. And my brother, he kept licking his teeth, and he's like, it's like cotton. Cotton. And what does my cousin do? This is what we do to young men. We insult them. You ain't nothing but a punk. Hit it again. That's all you have to do. You want to challenge a young man, you insult their manhood, which is another lesson that we should work on. My brother hits it again. He's like, man, I don't know if you let a skunk spray it. I don't know if a skunk rolled on it. I can't do it. Few people laughed, and I know why, right? So then I hit it. He didn't even have to tell me to hit it twice. I hit it twice. See, I used to light my mother's cigarettes on the stove, which meant I was just doing this on the stove. I don't even have, if you look closely, my eyebrows are almost gone, right? Did you light your parents? We were supposed to go like this, and I would get down real close. So how is it in the same setting at the first time, his response was different, and yet we have the same DNA? How many of you have siblings or parents who are alcoholics or addicted? Right. And assuming you're in recovery or not addicted, how is that possible? Science. My brother was handsome. He was like that Shamar guy on that CSI whatever show. He was super charming, and he wasn't that bright, but it didn't matter. He knew how to get over on teachers. And then everybody who I thought wanted to be my friend really just wanted to be my friend so they could be my brother's friend, right? So what does that do to my self-esteem? Not only that, we grew up in poverty. We grew up in Section 8 housing, where all the doors are painted the same color, so not only did we know we were poor, you knew I was poor. If I were to ask you right now, what community in Fostoria is the poorest?
I'm not from here actually.
Ma'am, you don't know? Nobody's going to tell me what area is the worst area in town? Does anybody know? What? What'd you say?
She just started.
Oh, okay. She said, let her know.
Echo.
And so that gets passed down generation. So people already had a judgment of who we were, right? And then on top of that, just like now, I was pretty well fed. Ma said, you're just loved. Those skinny kids aren't loved. And then, that was her way of making me feel better for being fat. You're just loved. And then, on top of that, my mother, when I was 10, said to me, women love their sons, and they raise their daughters, because the world is not built for you. And I would be a horrible mother to let you think otherwise, because you could have a Me Too moment. Wow. We're sharing right now, because what I heard at 10, I don't hear at 50. What I heard at 10 was, you don't love me. But what I heard at 50 was, you did a good job, woman, because you taught me how to protect myself. But at 10, I didn't hear it. So when my brother and I went to smoke, our experience and what was happening in the frontal lobe and the amygdala was completely different. Mine was, I love you. I'll always be your friend. I'll never judge you. Does it make sense to you? For some people, it's the alcohol. I love you. I'll always love you. I'll never let you down, right? For other people, it's cigarettes, right? So when we say we don't get it and we don't understand it, it's because we want to put a line between it and say that's a moral moral issue, a character flaw, they're a rotten person. But when my mother had cancer, would you have said she chose it? Because she chose to smoke. My mother started smoking at 15. Did she choose cancer? Does anyone in here have diabetes? Diabetes? How about high blood pressure? Okay, oh, the officers, this will be fun. Let's bring them in. So let me ask you, you clearly have stayed off of red meat because you know that's horrible for high blood pressure, right?
That's news to me. Thanks for telling me.
Oh, really? Okay, and you don't smoke.
No.
You exercise daily. Yeah.
Try to.
Yeah, and no alcohol and no salt.
I can't guarantee that.
But do you take medicine?
Correct, yes I do.
Right. And do you do all of those things every day?
Yes I do.
He has a treatment plan that he admits sometimes he doesn't stick to it, right? But if I said she's in treatment and she has a treatment plan, I need you to go to your meetings, whether those are AA or NA, or maybe there's some other form of meeting, and I need you to take your medication as required, and I need you to make sure you're staying away from old people, old places, old things, right? We act like if she slips up on that, what's the first thing we want to do? Throw her out of treatment. She's not being compliant. When he ate that steak with that salt and probably had a beer, do you think anybody went, throw him out, don't give him his medication anymore? Same thing when I hear about Narcan and people say, well, you know what, you don't have to give someone Narcan every day. We have to give Narcan to somebody 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. That's not right. Really? So if you have a heart attack and you continue to use, you get one shot. Can you imagine the legislation and the upheaval we would have if we put that on the books to say, well, listen, if somebody's diagnosed with high blood pressure and they're eating poorly and they end up having a heart attack, they only get to get saved once. And then after that, forget about it. Because remember, it's not a choice. It's a disease. And we would never criminalize high blood pressure or diabetes or cancer. The reason we feel comfortable doing it with the disease of addiction, it's because we've been lied to about what it is. So your job is, once you know better, it's incumbent upon you to do better, right? I've given you graphics. I've showed you what happens in the brain. I've showed you the areas that are affected. And there are ways to treat it. So when I'm dealing with a family, I know that I have to have a blueprint of what's going on. Some people, you remember the saying, when in Rome, do as Romans do? So a lot of times we're asking young people who are coming in from communities like you were talking about, right? Like, what do you value? Don't you want to go to college? Don't you want to be a police officer? Is that what's around them? Who's the most respected person in their community? The same can be said when we're talking about people, I've dealt with this, from Dublin, Worthington, and the higher areas. Who do you value? What do you value? And if it's all about making money, guess what might come naturally to that person? And just because they're in an affluent community doesn't mean there isn't a wrong side to it. So we have to understand the family, what they value, who's the primary caregiver, and what does that person value? The other piece are understanding the perspectives. A lot of times when I talk to young people, I will not do it in front of an adult. I will not ask them questions in front of their caregiver or parent because they're less likely to be honest. They're always going to be checking to see, am I sticking with the family story, right? The other thing is kids don't grow up in a bubble. They are spending more times with their peers or out of the home and on a computer than anything. And those things all have influential factors. When I look at the disease of addiction, I have to look across an entire span. I have to say, what's happening in the home? What kind of community? What's the genogram of the family? What's the propensity to get them connected to other resources? I never want to open up a wound that I can't close. And often what we have in some of the treatment that's going on in the communities is, hey, we'll get you into treatment, we'll give you 28 days, and when you get out, you'll be great. Have you seen that happen with cancer? Then why are we expecting this to be well within 28 days? The other thing that we'll do is say, you know what, we need to go ahead and let you take medication, but we're only going to do it for 2 years. Whoa. Are you still on medication to help with the kidney?
No.
You said you were on medication. Diabetes? Okay. How long you been on?
Since I was pregnant.
So how long ago was that?
I just had her, so about 9 months.
Okay. So we're going to give you about a year and 3 more months on that medicine. And then you need to be done.
I wish.
No. I mean, it's a disease, but you can control it. You can watch your weight. You can decrease the amount of stress in your life. You can control. But we do it to the disease of addiction. We say you can only take methadone for 2 years because that stuff is substituting a drug for a drug. No, it's not. It's substituting a medication for a drug. It's also the most proven form of medication-assisted treatment, the most researched. And none of these medications work alone. I would never just say, you get methadone, you get Suboxone, you get Vivitrol. Because if I don't get to the very quickness of the dis-ease, it's going to continue to make the person sick. So it's medication with treatment, with support services. And I'll tell you this, and sometimes I haven't been well received on this statement, but I'm going to be honest. I've worked with families sometimes, anybody in here a clinician, and said, you need to leave town because your family is making you sick. And your family needs you to be sick so that they don't focus on their own stuff. It's absolutely okay to do, because when one person goes into treatment, the reality is the entire family is going through the process. So when you see, is the family affected? Is the community affected? Absolutely. I'm learning a new walk, a new talk. That's instantly going to affect my interaction with you. I need employment. And when I go to a job, the first thing you say is, ooh, you've got a criminal record. Hey, but I've also got sobriety for 2 years, and I can drop urine for you, and you can test me, and you can talk to my sponsor or my clinician. Because once you give me a second chance, I'm so grateful. When I look at pulling my crew of people together, I really mean this. And so this is about children and families. It's not treating one person in isolation, and not every person is going to connect automatically with me. Usually I'll have a clinician who I would say is a hustler. Not a negative hustler, but somebody who, if I need a Y membership and the family doesn't have the money and I don't have a special pot of money, I need a hustler who can call up somebody from the Y and say, listen, this is going to help. And then I have to call up somebody who, hey, can you give them a chance on a job? 10 hours a week. Anything that I can do to put that person in a better position. Also, I don't typically like to send them back in the cut. If they come from a community that hasn't been supportive, I'm going to work with them on, tell me where you want to live that maybe isn't in that same community, and what's that community look like to you? When I did this, I do the preparing the site. So I do it like I'm building a foundation and building a house and having my work crew together, but also knowing that I need to measure twice and cut once. I need to make sure I have my social work competencies together, that I understand the disease of addiction, that I understand building rapport is of the utmost importance. Also, understanding the impact that substance use disorder has on the person's ability to parent, and making sure you're walking with both the parents as well as the child through the process, and allowing that child to be angry is critical. And what you usually find out from the genogram is the parent is angry too. When I did this originally, I was talking to some social workers and I thought I'd take this out, but I thought it was really important for you all, because when you talk about the big picture, it's never just talking about the drug, right? For many people, even if I did 26 presentations at Honda, and the opening of the presentation, it's a woman who worked at Honda for 16 years, got hurt, got on pills, went through her entire savings and lost her job. When I say it was like $900,000. And the reason it was important for them to have me speak was because they know that when they're not union. So if they're having people work 12 and 14 hours to work through pain, many are taking pills. And they didn't want to set them up. They want to get them linked to treatment, not fire them, get them linked to treatment, give them a leave of absence, because it costs more money to retrain or to train a new person. So when I went into it, one of the things I had to recognize was, you know, Marysville has a lot of people who have really big bank accounts and money who work at Honda. So it isn't always about growing up in an impoverished community. Sometimes the poverty has to do with a lack of connection with family. Because in our desire to be upwardly mobile, we can also be negligent in interacting with our family and kids. So there's also health issues. I can tell you from running the courts, a lot of times when people ended up getting sober, COPD seems to be huge. They've done so much damage. Dental work, because imagine you're not really concerned about hygiene, and in that regard you have to go with them to the dentist, because guess who we found out the number one prescribers are? Dentists, because they're not regulated by a hospital. And the other is, we do talk about harm reduction. What does that mean? Harm reduction is this. Some people say, well, that you're just giving them permission to use. No matter what I do, their sobriety is not because of me, and their relapse is not because of me. I don't have that power. Trauma has that power. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to continue to use, one of the things we need to talk about is, I can't have you keeping stuff in the house with your kids. Because we did have 8 children die from fentanyl, because they got in their parents' stash. We've had officers who've overdosed after they didn't use the proper equipment, or no, he did use the proper equipment, took his gloves off and he had a little here, and went to, well, that absorbs into the skin. 58% of our deaths involved fentanyl. So if you know someone who's using, there is a chance that fentanyl is involved, a 58% chance, which means you have to keep yourself protected. Don't recap the needle. Make sure that you have gloves on or you're wearing protective gear. But when I deal with all of the myths that go around this, sorry, I got lost for a second because I just imagined that person. And dealing with harm reduction, I talk about, do you have naloxone available? This is with me at all times in my purse. I'm going to pass it around. The reason we passed House Bill 4 is that you can purchase this over the counter. There's a standing order, and you can dispense it. And there's no bad side effects if the person isn't overdosing. And we have clear signs of what an overdose looks like. When I say pinpoint pupils, it is pinpoint. And if you administer it and the person was just drunk and passed out, there's no bad effects. No harm, no foul. Okay? I talk about, do you have naloxone? If you're going to use, please get some clean syringes. Please keep it out of the way of the children. Lock it in a box. Be honest. If somebody's using, can you use with them? Can you use with somebody else so that you're not alone? Keep the door open in case they have to call these guys and they can't get in the door because somebody's locked the door because they're scared they're going to get arrested. Well, we have a Good Samaritan law that says, you know what? We're not arresting you this time. But if you want to go to treatment, we can help you get linked to treatment. We can take you over to the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board and they can help you get there. We also say don't overwhelm and inundate, much of what I just did with you all today. I've given you so much information, like I said, it's an entire course. But the reality is this, you now know better, right? You now have more insight than you walked in here. And to think of this as an isolated moment, an isolated disease, it is never that way. When we had the threat of Ebola, do you know how much money the state spent on the threat of Ebola? Do you know how many electronic health records were modified instantly? And how many people got infected? None. We're dealing with a death rate of over 5,000 people a year. This is not about choice. This is a disease. And we need to utilize and maximize all the resources that we have. You can purchase that naloxone over the counter at your local pharmacy. We have 77% of pharmacies are on board with it. I bill it against my insurance and they let me get it every 90 days for $25. And also go through the proper training, because I'll show you this real quick as a visual. There are 2 types. There's the kind where you can put an atomizer, but you know in the movies where they poke the needle to see if the medicine, you can't do that because you'll dispense all of it. It's only 2 milligrams. So you don't test it, you just put it in the nose, spray it, turn them on their side, okay? If you are combative when waking them up, they're going to be combative, because remember, you just threw them into immediate withdrawal. So staying calm during that process is important, but also calling 911 from the very beginning. The one that you have in front of you is like Afrin. And so that one, again, you can't test it. You take it off, you push it in immediately, okay? When I say that families are whatever they compromise themselves of, what we know is the more support a person has, whether it's biological or not, if the family is together, the more likely they are to stay in recovery. Notice the words I didn't use. I didn't say they were dirty. I didn't say they were clean or dirty because that automatically implies something. The other thing that I want you, this is my information if you want to get a hold of me or you have questions, but the primary thing I want you to do is if you go to this website, and for those who don't feel comfortable going to the website, I am going to give you my phone number because I think that's the appropriate thing to do. You go to this website, it is a ton of information. We have videos on how to get rid of medications. We have what schools and what policies are in place. But also, here's another one if you're able to go on the computer. It is takechargeohio.org. That is both for prescribers and patients and caregivers. The other key to that takechargeohio.org is it is constantly being updated. And if you go under Get Help, it links you to a site called Emerald Jenny. And this was a family who lost their daughter, and they were all technicians, IT people, so they created a real-time website of what treatment is available in the state, and if it's a bad review, you let them know, that thing is modified immediately. So it's a really good resource. I'm now going to open it up to questions, because as I said, I've inundated you, and it's the least I could do. And I will say thank you for your time and your respect and attention. And I hope I've given you the same.